Hello everyone. This is going to be a series of videos in which I want to explore the possibilities of black against sharp gambit lines offered by white. There's a dearth, if you like, in chess material of a complete comprehensive study of all the gambits and their variations solely from black's point of view. There is a lot of material on the gambits on the internet, on YouTube. J-Roby has some excellent videos about some traps that black can have waiting for white if white declines. If you're interested in gambits and traps into your Blitz player online, I suggest you look at those videos. There are also numerous analyses of various games by many YouTubers, which are pretty cool. Now, I'm not a very experienced chess player or a strong chess player. I'm a hobbyist chess player, and while playing with black, I have often encountered that young players tend to play sharp gambit lines instead of, say, Ruy Lopez or entering into Najdorf's variations. And I haven't found a comprehensive guide that tells black how to play against the gambit. So I just want to explore these lines solely from black's perspective, and as it were, to build a repertoire for black playing against white's gambit lines. So if you're a hobbyist player, these videos may interest you. For part one, I've chosen King's Gambit, and there are two ways of playing it: King's Gambit accepted and King's Gambit declined. Now, King's Gambit in ECO code starts from C30 and ends on C39, so there are lots and lots of variations. And of course, I can't enter all of these in my repertoire, so I've chosen some. So for King's Gambits accepted, we have two main variations: King's Knight's Gambit and King's Bishop's Gambit. In King's Knight's Gambit, black can reply in a number of ways, and Abbazia Defence, Quaid Gambit, and Kaiseretsky variation are my favorites. In King's Bishop's Gambit lines, there is Ruy Lopez Defense, and then there is Chigorin's Attack. Whereas in King's Gambit declined, we have the Falkbeer Counter Gambit. Now, these are the lines that I want to explore, and these are from my repertoire. I guess I have added all these lines to my repertoire, and I want to experiment with these. So let me show you first of all what King's Gambit is. King's Gambit starts with the King's Pawns game, E4, E5. And when white offers its f-pawn to black, that is where the gambit starts. And e takes f4, that's King's Gambit accepted. Now, as white's third move, white can choose to play knight f3, which would be the King's Knight's Gambit, or bishop to c4, which is the King's Bishop's Gambit. Now, knight f3 is King's Knight's Gambit, which we're going to explore in this video. And the response line to knight f3 that I want to explore specifically in this video is called the Abbazia Defence, which is d5. So e4, e5, f4, e takes f4, knight f3, d5. That's Abbazia Defence. Of course, if white plays bishop c4, we have Chigorin's Attack, and that's what I'm going to explore in another video coming up very soon, hopefully. So d5, the Abbazia Defense, And one response, instead of the Abbazia defense, like I talked in the introduction a couple of minutes ago, is g5, which is called the Quade's Gambit. So, but we're not going to explore this line just yet. d5. Now, what's the idea behind this line? Of course, the general idea behind any gambit lines from White's perspective is to open up the files, mobilize all the pieces, get the initiative going, you know, attack mercilessly. And the main focus of most of the gambits are the central squares. So this is where most of the battle takes place. So I like this idea of countering the center forces of White right away from Black's perspective. So what Abbazia Defense does right away is to challenge this pawn on e4 and to ask, okay, so what you going to do? Are you going to take it, or are you going to refute it and do something else? Now, in various continuations, Spassky took this pawn more than often, and in various continuations, White sometimes chooses even not to take this pawn. Here's a game that I played. I chose this game to show you the prelims of this defense of the Abbazia defense, because it's a very normal game played between normal hobbyist club players, you know, nothing very special, but just exploring the possibilities from Black's side. I chose to play the Abbazia defense, and I think it's pretty playable for Black. This is one move that you know, you can enter into your repertoire and you can say, okay, this is a good move, you know. So let's see from the start once again. e4, e5, that's the king's pawns game. f4, that's the king's gambit. E takes f4, king's gambit accepted. kga. Knight f3, that's king's knight's gambit. So king's gambit accepted, king's knight's gambit. The reply d5, Abbazia defense. Now the game went like this. E takes d5, my opponent took. I brought my knight out to f6, attacking his pawn on d5. Again, the idea is to attack the central forces of White. And he brought his knight out to defend. Now I brought my bishop out, my king's bishop, to c5. Now this is actually a mistake, but what I wanted to do, the idea that I had in mind, and I was, you know, struggling under the pressure of the clock. It was a 10 minutes game, played it online. So I just, you know, I had one idea in my mind: to attack along the c5 g1 diagonal, to not to let the White's king castle anytime sooner, you know. And a straightaway reply to this is to push the d pawn up to the 4th rank right away, and I would have lots of problems. But my opponent chose not to do that, and instead continued with bishop b5, attacking my king. Bishop b5 check. I defended with my queen's bishop. I took back with the knight, with queen's knight. So it's knight b takes d7. Then he pushed his pawn up to d4, attacking my bishop. Instead of taking it, now you notice that our light square bishops are gone. They are off the board. You know, I have some possibilities. So I checked him with the queen. He blocked with the knight, so some material was exchanged here. And finally I took back with the queen, with a check, and he blocked with his queen. I brought my bishop up to d4, and he took on f4 with his bishop. I took on c3 with my bishop, c3 check, bishop c3, bishop takes c3 check. He took back I exchanged the queens, and the game went on. And so we're exploring the Abbazia defense in King's Gambit accepted, King's Knight's Gambit, e4, e5, f4, e takes f4, knight f3, and d5. This is the main line for Abbazia defense, d5. So let's look at this game played between Mr. Boris Spassky and Mr. Bronstein, where Bronstein was black and Spassky was white, and Bronstein chose to play the Abbazia defense. Now Bronstein lost this game, but analyzing this game, we'll be able to figure out some main ideas behind gambits generally, and some ideas behind the d5 line, the main line for Abbazia defense. Now Mr. Boris Alterman has got an excellent gambit guide out. He's got many lectures in there. I've only gotten to the lecture number 17, and he talks about ideas behind gambits and analyzes lots of games, but from White's perspective mostly. So I urge you to look at that as well. Now, I feel quite out of league to, analyzing this game played between the grandmasters, but still, I'll get out of it what I can, according to my skill level. And if I make a mistake, please correct me. So e4, e5, f4, e takes f4, knight f3, d5. And Mr. Spassky now took this pawn on d5. So he takes d5. Now Bronstein brought his bishop out to d6. Knight c3 was the reply from Mr. Spassky. Now King's Knight brought out to e7. Please note this here. We'll come back to this in a minute, but please note where Bronstein is placing his pieces and really losing the tempi, losing the initiative. Mr. Boris Alterman talks about the main idea behind any gambit, and that is to develop your pieces very quickly and very rapidly to the best available squares towards the center, and at the same time to keep the initiative. Instead of trying to just develop passively, you have to be aggressive while playing a gambit. I think I'll agree to that. So d4. Now this is another idea in the King's Gambit accepted lines, to push the d pawn up the board at some point in time in the game. Bronstein castles short, and Spassky brings his king's bishop out to d3. Knight d7, castles, h6. I want you to pause here for a second and just look at the board. Look at black's position. The Abbazia defense is a very playable line for black, at least as far as I have experienced it and as far as I have studied others' games, grandmasters' games. But if you look at the board right now, you can see that all of almost all of Mr. Bronstein's pieces are resting on their home racks. And so if we were to look at the influence of Mr. Bronstein's army on the board, what we have is this bishop slicing through the board, perhaps the only active piece currently. And do we have any other major piece cutting through the board? No. This bishop here on c8 is blocked, the rooks are blocked in. And then we have the knight. These two knights here have some squares. And so this is pretty much it, I would say that black is limited to the 5th rank at the most. This is the rank that black's influence is to the most. But most of black's pieces are resting in their home ranks, and I don't see any initiatives for black here. I don't see any counterplay for black. And with the exception of this pawn, which is an advanced pawn, but it's very weak, and we're going to see in a minute that it's not going to do any good to Mr. Bronstein's play. So the game continues. Knight e4. Now Mr. Spassky brings his knight to the center of the board. Very strong square, e4, and this knight is pretty dangerous. So Bronstein has to get rid of it, and quick. Knight takes d5, c4, knight e3, takes with the bishop, bishop takes e3, f takes e3. Now this pawn is very, very weak. This pawn there is absolutely no way that Bronstein can defend this pawn. At the same time, if we look at the 12th move, which is 12c5 and bishop e7, now with the exception of this pawn, all of Bronstein's pieces are resting in their home ranks, in the first 2 ranks. So you see this bishop here at e7, locked in. It has a little influence towards these 2 diagonals, the e7 h4 and e7 a3 diagonals. But other than that, I think it's pretty passive. It's not attacking or doing anything. Then we have the knight, which is pretty passive too. Just has a couple of attacking squares here, here, and here, and isn't really doing much. Other than these 2 pieces, there is absolutely no piece of black which is in the game. And that is very, very important to note. I think that is the biggest mistake black can make while playing King's Gambit Accepted. And as far as I can see, I mean, for the first time, when I saw this game for the first time, reaching to the 12th move, I saw that black was lost, I didn't know the outcome, and I was watching it on a Java applet, which showed game of the day, and didn't tell me who versus who the game is, and what is the outcome of the game. And so I was watching the game. I was hitting the play button and just watching it, and I knew that black is lost here. No initiatives, no counterplay. So 13 bishop c2 and rook e8 now tries to bring his rook. Bronstein tries to bring his rook to an open file. Queen d3. Now please note, this is a very dangerous battery towards the king that Mr. Spassky has formed. And we'll see in a minute a very brilliant sacrifice made by Mr. Spassky to open up this diagonal and remove his own knight from blocking the queen and the bishop. e2 pushes the pawn. Desperate try, I would say. Desperate try to gain at least some momentum, but too late, too late. Knight d6, and this is the sacrifice idea that I was talking about earlier. Now this knight here cannot be taken, and do you see why? If c takes d6, then queen h7 mate. So you can't take this knight. And I think knight f8 is a poor reply. Analysis shows that knight f6 was a better reply. Nevertheless, now the knight attacks the g7 pawn sorry, f7 pawn, and the game is over. Nowhere to run. E takes f1, promoted to queen. Again, another desperate try. Check. Rook takes. Now bishop comes out to f5. Queen takes. Queen to d7. Queen to f4. Bishop f6. Knight 3 e5, and the game is over. Here, black resigned. Hello everyone. This is third video on the Abbazia Defence, and this is another game that Bronstein played, but this time playing with white. And his opponent is a very, very strong chess player, Botvinnik. Of course, all of you know him. And Botvinnik in this game chose to play Abbazia Defence. And it's a very, very interesting game. Let's see what happened here. Now, this was played in Russia in 1952. So it's a game which took place before the other game of Bronstein versus Spassky that we saw in the last video. Just wanted to show you the main ideas and how Botvinnik developed his pieces. E4, E5, that's the king's pawns game, like we've been talking about. F4, main line for king's gambit. E takes F4, that's king's gambit accepted. Knight F3, king's knight's gambit, and D5. This is the Abbazia Defence. And E takes D5. Bronstein takes. And now Botvinnik develops his king's knight on the square f6, as opposed to Bronstein in the game that we viewed in the last video, who developed his knight on e7. Now, as you can see, both of these moves have the same idea of attacking that central pawn, the idea that continues from the main line of Abbazia attack. But Botvinnik, being a very strong chess player, Bronstein is a very strong chess player too, and he has an excellent rating and average while playing King's Gambit, and he's won many games playing King's Gambit accepted. But here we see a little more superior imagination from Botvinnik. And he's placed the knight on f6, which is a more active square. It's going towards the center, and it's an ideal spot for the knight. And so bishop b5, check, c6 to defend, d takes c6, and b takes c6. Now this pawn cannot be captured. It's backed up by the knight on b8. Bishop c4 has to retreat somewhere, so finds the square c4. Knight d5. Now another main idea of playing the gambits for black, to not lose the initiative. So this is the first move, I think, first move of the game in which from which black starts to gain the tempi, blocking the bishop right away. And again, we see that main idea of King's Gambit accepted, d pawn being pushed up to the 4th rank. Now bishop d6, another good square for the bishop now. Castle's short, Botvinnik, castle's short. Knight c3, knight takes c3, pawn takes c3, b takes c3. And now bishop g4, pinning the knight with the queen, breaks the pin, knight d7, And now here, I want you to pause for a moment and compare this position of black with the game that we saw before. Now we can see almost all of black's pieces are well developed. We have this knight, this bishop here on g4, this bishop here on d6, this knight here on d7. We have this pawn up on f4, this pawn here on c6. And these rooks can come into action very quickly. So this knight has its influence on these squares in the center. It's going towards the center. At the same time, this bishop is slicing through this c8, h3 diagonal. Also cutting through this diagonal here, which is g4, d1 diagonal, d1, g4 diagonal. Then we have this bishop, the dog-squared bishop, cutting through the board again. This bishop is actually placed at the same place where Bronstein placed his bishop in the previous game that we saw. But here it's backed up by other pieces as well. And we have the queen, which can come out to play in just one move. Then we have the rooks coming out to open files in just one move each. And so we see that black has actually lots of counterplay here. He has lots of good squares to move his pieces to, and his pieces are well placed. Compare this or contrast this to the black's position in the previous game, and you'll see the main idea behind Gambits not to lose the initiative. So the game continued g3, knight b6, attacking the bishop. Bishop retreats to b3, c5, c4, queen f6, knight e5. You can see that black is countering very well. It's an excellently playable line for black, the Abbazia defense. Bishop takes e5, d takes e5, now queen takes e5, bishop takes f4, queen moves to h5, rook f e1, brought to the open file, rook f e8, challenging that rook placed on the open file, a4, bishop e2, now attacking the queen, and queen c3, knight d7, a5, knight f6, bishop a4, rook e6, king g2, knight e4. And you can already see, this game is lost for white. Queen a3, g5, and white resigns. Let's see some possible continuations. Say bishop takes g5 here. Then queen takes g5. Queen, say, comes to c1. And the queen can comfortably go back to h5. And as you can see, black is up a piece and winning very easily. It's a very dynamic situation. And black has clear advantage, and he's going to mate in a few moves. But say bishop doesn't take g5. What are the other replies? Bishop e3, okay. Queen f3, if king h3, the only good square for the king, then rook h6, mate. Hello and welcome to the last video in the series of Kings, Knights, Gambit, Abbazia Defence. This is a game played between Swanson and John Nunn in the late 70s. Swanson was white and John Nunn was black. Interesting game. Becomes Abbazia Defence by transposition. So the game went like this: f4, birds opening, e5, Swiss gambit, e4, e takes f4, that is king's gambit by transposition, knight f3, king's knight's gambit, d5, Abbazia defense, e takes d5, knight f6. We saw in the previous videos that this move is better than knight e7, bishop b5, c6, defending against the check, d takes c6, and now John Nunn chooses here to take with the knight instead of the pawn, as we saw in the previous video. Knight takes c6. Now, if you see here, if you pause for a moment and look at the board, you can see that black has developed his pieces very nicely. Both his knights are resting on ideal squares from where they have access to the center of the board. And can jump to any of these squares. Also, we see that the files have been ripped open. So this is a completely open file, the E file. We have, from black's perspective, a semi-open D file. We have a semi-open C file. And the B file is going to be opened very soon, and the rook can come to it. This bishop here already has this diagonal available to him. This one has this diagonal. So both bishops, although in their home ranks, have some mobility available to them, and can come into the play very quickly. From white's perspective, we have the semi-open F file. And so the three basic rules of Gambit play, which is to open up the files as soon as possible, to develop your pieces rapidly to the best available squares, and to not lose initiative, have been utilized by John Nunn in this game. And black has a superior position, in my opinion, at this moment in game. If we look at white, we can see that most of his pieces are blocked in. Both rooks are locked. This knight has yet to find an ideal square, and the only square available to this knight is c3 at the moment. This bishop is locked in badly. Queen has a diagonal available to it, but is blocked by the knight here, and so its mobility is limited. This knight, however, is placed relatively better and has some access to the center of the board. But other than that, white is in a pretty bad shape. So there's no point in playing a gambit line if you're not going to develop your pieces rapidly. The game continued. After knight takes c6, queen e2, check, bishop e7, blocks, d4, and this is one of the main ideas in King's Knight's Gambit, or in King's Gambit generally, to push up the d pawn to 4th rank, as we've seen previously as well. Castle's short, bishop takes c6, and b takes c6, castles. Now, after castling, this is the middle game now, and in middle game as well, you can see that black pieces have more mobility than the white's pieces, and they are placed better on the board. Bishop g4, pinning the queen, queen c4 breaking the pin, bishop d6, knight c3, rook c8, king h1. King h1 move is probably a preemption of these two batteries here. So a silent but good move by Swanson. Knight d5, ideal square for the bishop, for the knight, I'm sorry. Knight's potential is maximized on this square. This is, of course, realized by Swanson, and he takes. Nunn brings his bishop to e6, pinning the queen, and so queen d3 breaks the pin. Otherwise, he would have a problem. C takes d5. So Nunn here takes the knight back. c3, f6, bishop d2, queen d7, and with each move you can see that black is developing his pressure on the white side. b3, bishop f5, queen a6, g5, rook a e1, bishop e4, queen a5, queen f5, bishop c1, rook f e8, c4, d takes c4, queen takes f5, bishop takes f5. This is now the end game with the queens coming off the board. And we can see that, we can see clearly black has a pawn's advantage. He's a pawn up. And at the same time, there are two bishops of black versus a knight and a bishop of white, which in theory is always better. It's better to have two bishops against a knight and a bishop. Also, we can see that black's pieces are well placed, are better placed, more dynamically placed, and Nunn has a better chance at winning this game. Rook takes e8, rook takes back, b takes c4, bishop d3, rook e1, rook takes e1, knight takes e1. Now Nunn realizes that with this exchange of rooks, he's forcing white to take back with the knight, and e1 is a very bad square for knight, and he's forced into a defensive position. Bishop takes c4, a3, king f7, now kings come into the play, king g1, this is the end game now, king e6, king f2, king d5, bishop b2, bishop c7, king f3, h5, h3, so blocking always for the king, f5, knight c2, g4, king f2, a5, king e1, bishop b3, knight a1. I'm sorry, knight a1 move was not played in the actual game. I was just looking at some continuations. Bishop b3, and white resigns here. Swanson lost the game, and you can clearly see why. You know, this pawn here, white pawn, the only passed pawn, has no defenders left, and the knight is under attack currently. The knight, though, can move to the only available square a1, which is a pretty bad square for the knight, to say the least. This bishop can come back to c4. At the same time, there's also the law of two weaknesses coming into play very soon. These two pawns are going towards f1 square to be promoted. You know, if g takes h3, then g takes h3, and these two pawns are passed pawns. These are backed up by this bishop, which can come up to both these diagonals, and very soon the bishop first can come to the b6 square and attack this pawn here, get rid of it, exchanging the pair of bishops, exchanging these two bishops, and this bishop here on b3 can move back, and at some point when this pawn here on f4 has been pushed
this bishop can come here and influence lots of squares from here. So this was an interesting game that I thought I'd share with you. Thank you for watching all my videos, and in the next video we'll start looking at the Quaid Gambit.